Okay, we're going to start while we're waiting for Carole. My name is Sarah Donaldson. I'm a journalist editor at The Observer. I work very closely with Carole Cadwalladr, and Carole was due to chair this talk, but she is stuck in Vancouver, where she gave the opening talk at this year's TED Festival. So I've stepped in to moderate, but she will be joining us. So on the panel today, we have four incredible people who are doing brilliant work researching and reporting and storytelling on big data and how it affects all of our lives and our society today. We have Jonathan Albright, who is an academic at the University of Western Australia, an academic and also very, very brilliant coder. We have Miazia Schueler, a researcher at AI Forensics, which is a brilliant organization that does deep research into the way that algorithms propagate injustices and prejudices online. Omer Benjakob, a journalist from Haaretz in Israel, who has done some brilliant investigative work into how big data has been used to manipulate elections. And then Carole, who will be joining us, who is best known for her work on the Cambridge Analytica scandal and continues her work today into big data, big tech, and the way it is disrupting our world. So I think I'm going to ask each of our panelists to spend a little bit of time just talking about what they're currently working on and the sort of work they're doing and how it relates to what I've just talked about. Jonathan.
Hi there, I'm Jonathan Albright. So I am an academic, but I'm also what I would call a data journalist. So I have worked on a variety of projects over the years. I was at Columbia University last time. I actually was at this festival. So I have a role, I guess, in working with journalists and supporting them with data investigations and helping build out stories based on data and projects that I would say are larger than the scope of a normal story. So right now, I am working on a project on YouTube. So, and I'm looking at what I would say is what I would call hate or hate speech and patterns of gendered language and gendered specific hate through different YouTube or features like YouTube comments, YouTube's live chat. So I'm doing a kind of longitudinal study of a large event on YouTube and pulling out and mapping the different ways and patterns that language was gender directed and hate speech was used and targeted through YouTube. So it's a current project that I'm working on and it's under peer review, so I'm not going to talk about it a whole lot, but it's a big project. So beyond that, I'm also working on smaller projects, looking at algorithms and looking at things like Google News and looking at how they prioritize and rank stories. So I do a lot of different work, and I also teach full-time as an academic, so I keep quite busy. So I'll turn it over. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Miazia. Thanks for having me. I'm a researcher. I work for AI Forensics. We're a nonprofit organization based in Europe, so we're kind of all over the place. I have a background in digital media through which I started, looking at algorithmic oppression, which led me to AI Forensics. At AI Forensics, we investigate influential and opaque algorithms to hold the platforms accountable and to seek transparency. So what we do is algorithmic auditing, so we develop tools to look at the platform, so we collect evidence to then conduct investigations. That's where I come in as a researcher. So I develop methodologies according to different research questions to then expose violations and harms and try to escalate that to a policy and advocacy level and to inform regulation. And that's where we also try to collaborate with journalists, but I think I'll get to that in a bit. I mainly work with we work with a policy framework. For example, I focus on the Digital Services Act, specifically Article 34, which asks very large online platforms and very large online search engines, meaning platforms that have over 45 million users in Europe, to mitigate certain risks regarding illegal content or election integrity, gender-based violence, protection of minors, mental health, and more. So we look into recommender systems, or algorithmic features, content moderation. We look into ads and into their terms and conditions and policies. We work on various platforms. Those are YouTube, TikTok, Google, on porn platforms, as well as LLMs. Do I have more time? Or do I wrap it up?
Yeah, we can come back, so maybe.
Okay.
So hi, it's very nice to be here. This venue is obscenely beautiful, and it's very nice to be here. So I'm the tech and cyber reporter for Haaretz, and I always like to say that those are two words that have no meaning. Cyber just means digital, and disinformation just means lies, and I'm pretty sure that was around before social media. And I say it in this way because I think what I'm currently working on is what I've always been working on, which is what I think kind of brings this panel together, and certainly is kind of what Carole has taught us all to do, which is to not think about tech as its own kind of domain in its own right. And what I'm interested in, and what my newspaper is interested in, what my investigations try to look at, is how tech is misused or is used to exacerbate existing issues. And I think the Israeli context is for me very salient and very easy to work with, because I'm from that society. And when you see, for example, how issues of disinformation or even disinformation as a service and service providers originating in Israel kind of do that, from my perspective, it plugs into a wider societal issue, which is how we treat truth as a society and what we're interested in. And specifically to your question, what I'm interested in now more than anything is actually coming back to kind of what I perceive to be as kind of the foundational stones of the internet. And my initial interest as an investigative reporter was actually Wikipedia. And I'm now circling back to Wikipedia after many years of ignoring it, because I think when you think about AI, and this is the last time I will use those two words, those letters, the single largest source in AI language models is Wikipedia, and the question what information is reaching us and how is actually very important. And if you can manipulate Wikipedia, it's actually a very, very lucrative kind of thing. So I'm looking into that, and my other obsession is Substack and kind of like these closed circles of the internet. So I think Substack is a huge arena for disinformation these days. So that's what I'm on these days.
Thank you. And Carole has, I believe, joined us. She was there a second ago. Carole, are you there? Can you speak?
I am there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that I'm not there in that beautiful church with you in that beautiful town, but you might hear that I've had a few issues. I've talked myself out and I lost my voice completely. So apologies for not being there in person. But so to introduce myself, I loved what Omer said there about how tech is, like, to try not to use that word because tech is everything now. So I started out as a feature writer on The Observer. Sarah has been my editor during the whole time that I did this sort of big investigation into Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and all the sort of things which flowed from that around Brexit and Trump, etc. And I think, I've been on a real journey with this subject in that, for me, this subject is just about power. It's all about power, and it's how power is now expressed in the world. And I think one of the whole things about, panels which have got data in the title is that for most people, they just don't, for them, that word is just so boring and dry and abstract and has nothing to do with them. And I think the thing that I'm really focused on these days is how do you bring that to life for most people? How do you smuggle in stories about data and tech into stories that people do understand and do care about? So I've just done a project with the BBC, a podcast, which is on the surface nothing to do with data and tech. It's about a young woman, my former stepdaughter, who was stalked over many years. But we are able to smuggle this question of how did the stalker know about her? Where was he getting this information from? And, one of the things we've looked at is that he was able to data harvest her essentially in various ways from open source, but also closed platforms. And so I really want to do this thing of trying to find original ways of talking about these issues in a way that most people can sort of like are interested in, do understand. Because, I just worry that they think it has nothing to do with them. And increasingly, I'm actually here at TED at the moment in Vancouver, but it's Silicon Valley. I'm in this Silicon Valley bubble. And these companies, you know, they're out of control, and they've now been given impunity by a US president. And it is, I cannot tell you what it is like to be in the middle of what is an absolute AI gold rush. And underlying that AI gold rush is this whole question of data, which is, you know, as we know, is being illegally harvested in totally untransparent ways, which is now the foundation models for our sort of whole world going forward. So it really feels like the problems are accelerating, and the difficulties, as you guys will talk about, of researching that is just getting harder and harder and harder. And the challenge of making people care and understand this is just gone up another level. The stakes have gone up again.
Thank you. And I should mention, actually, because Carole's probably too modest to do so, that she is doing so much to do that, to make everyone aware, so much so that she gave the opening talk of this year's TED conference, at which he lobbed a grenade into the Silicon Valley audience and basically implored them to open their eyes about their role in the sort of autocratic takeover of the states that is currently happening. So it's interesting, Carole, you talked about, you just mentioned how it's getting increasingly difficult to access some of this data, and how do we as journalists and researchers and academics get hold of the data to kind of explore these stories. Jonathan, maybe you could say a little more about how that's got increasingly difficult over the years.
Sure. So I think that if you look back, there's been different eras of what I would call provisioned data access. So one of the times that we went through in the past decade, I would call the API era. Even though everything didn't come from the API, a lot of the public data that was used for research came from what I would say is like provisioned access through platforms. So these have been used in a variety of ways, but one of the things that's very important to when you look back at the Facebook APIs and Twitter APIs is that they were never set up to be transparency mechanisms, right? We used them, or researchers used the Twitter API to collect public data and to kind of audit platforms. But and Facebook Graph API would be a similar, but the whole purpose of APIs to begin with was really to set up infrastructure, capital infrastructure, so platforms could leverage their user data and grow. And I think that what you would refer to in the situation that we're at right now is called, I would call it, people call it the post-API era, where one by one, most of the platforms have shut off data. So the cost to even get basic X access, x.com, I mean, is prohibitive. It's thousands of dollars a year just for the lowest level of Twitter access. So there were claims that the reason is because OpenAI was scraping the data from Twitter. You know, so I don't know what's true and what's not. But as a researcher, I do know that our methods or the availability of what's called structured data, or data that is coming from the platform that we can trust to a certain degree, is really not available anymore. So as researchers, this presents a very, especially academics, this presents a conundrum for how we can use that data. So there's other methods to get data. We can scrape things on the web. We can set up Python tools to capture things. But at the same time, this usually involves some type of violation of the developer terms of service, or we're violating things that the platforms have set up. So sometimes they enforce it and they'll remove your account. But I mean, it's really, as a researcher, there's an ethics challenge in using things like scrape data. So we're at a level or a point in kind of the research era that we have to use any means possible, I would say. I mean, there you have to use all the kind of means possible, and that does include scrape data, but we also have to be careful of how we use it and how that's given to us. So, and we also can't trust entirely that the remaining APIs that are available. So I would say the biggest API that's available still publicly where we can pull data from would be YouTube, and to some degree Reddit or Telegram. But we're moving through different eras, and I think that even though data was freely available, I mean, I don't see like Twitter data, for example, that it was used in hundreds or thousands of studies to kind of show public opinion. Twitter was never that important for regular people. So it was important for journalists, it was important for politicians, but we have to be very aware of how we use different platform data in the context and how we apply that. So, and we have to note that a lot of data is never really sanctioned or provided to us. So a good example being things like on YouTube, we can get comments, right? We can get videos from accounts, but some things that are not available that are very important, things like the YouTube live chat does not have an API where we can pull the live chat post or the live chat comments. So live chats are a huge part of the platforms. So we're moving through different eras, I guess, to wrap this up, and each has its own features and benefits, and it's getting more chaotic for sure. But there are still ways and there are still techniques, which probably I'll save for later, to kind of get data for research purposes or get data for journalism in the public interest.
And the other problem, of course, did you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to say something small about that. Just I think it's people don't fully understand how big of an issue it is. Like research about disinformation has been pretty much stuck since about 1.5 years or 2 years after Carole's Cambridge Analytica, because they just shut down the APIs. And people like me who follow disinformation research, it's actually amazing. Like there's so few data sets of disinformation campaigns beyond what Twitter officially released. And for us to like we have to have people like Jonathan and people who can actually get this data for us, and the situation has actually gotten worse, is what I wanted to say.
Well, because of course we also have the problem of data being erased. You mentioned earlier, Jonathan, when we were talking, that the reproductive rights website of the US has just been completely deleted, and that without the Wayback Machine, there wouldn't be any record of it. And Carole, there's a sort of flip side about data access happening in the States at the moment, which is, as you said in your TED Talk, which is Doge going and kind of hacking the government data so that millions of citizens' data is now falling into different hands. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it was one of my, just total alarm bells ringing was that first weekend that, Trump took power. The very first thing that Musk did was to send his guys into the Treasury to, gain unlawful access to the entire nation's financial data. And as we know, is that once that data is out there, you can never get it back. And so the fact that, what Musk is doing is this just massive, massive, massive data grab. And you come back to this thing that data is power. He is amassing this huge amount of power of the entire US nation and combining that data opaquely with other forms of data to create, which is feeding into these AIs. And it's these AIs now which are making life and death decisions in the US, deciding who to sack, right? Federal workers who lose their healthcare and their families' healthcare overnight, who are choosing which programs to axe. It's all being done completely opaquely inside these AIs, which are controlled by one man, essentially. So we, to talk about how we're in a completely different era now. And, I think the whole thing is that from 2016, when the world really sort of started waking up to the power of these platforms, we had incredible research through that period. Like we had this 8-year period, which people like Jonathan, Miazia, were able to do really solid research to show that the absolute sort of reach of these platforms and their effect on our lives. But we fundamentally failed to do anything about it, really. I mean, we do have this legislation in Europe. There is a somewhat different situation there. But I think the way now that we can see these companies so emboldened, the fact that, the leaders of these are global platforms, and we see the leaders of these companies now so clearly aligned with Trump, that I think the idea that we can hold them to account in these traditional ways is increasingly unlikely. And so for me, again, it comes back to this. we have to do a better job of storytelling this to people to make them understand and care why this is so fundamental to their lives and why we really all have to start thinking so much, differently about the amount of data we are giving away in every transaction we're doing on the internet and how that means we're giving up. I talk about you've got to think about data as being naked selfies. It's sort of harmless in itself if that's your thing. You really don't want it in the wrong hands. And we're in a situation now where these vast troves of data are literally in the hands of some of the worst people on the planet.
Yeah, that's interesting question to explore a bit more now, is the role that we as journalists, researchers and academics can play in the way that we work. I suppose the question is about how we collaborate together. And Miazia, I know a lot of the work that your team does is about collaboration and how we bring different experts together and the role we then play in presenting that information to the public.
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, as I mentioned, our work revolves around producing evidence of, continuous marginalizations, willful ignorance, and strategic discrimination. So it's super important that we come together, civil society organizations, academics, journalists, and that we all work on this together from the start, because all of our perspectives and all of our research methodologies are so different. I mean, we all do the same, we all do research, but in our own ways, and I think that there's so much that we can there's so many ways in which we can help each other out. In our case, sometimes we start working with journalists from, the very beginning. Sometimes we bring them in towards the end once we have a report written and say, okay, and how can we make a story out of this? We work with journalists quite a bit.
And storytelling is a very important part of it. And I know, Jonathan, you have some different views on that. But first, I wanted to ask you, Omer, about your incredible team, Jorge, is that right? Story.
Jorge, George, depending where you are.
Thank you. And I believe you went undercover to report that story. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So it's actually a very interesting story about collaboration. I'll just quick shout out here to Forbidden Stories and to Amnesty Tech, who kind of helped bring us all together initially. And I think that when you think about tech investigation or investigations about technology, there's an asymmetrical warfare to it. We come from newspapers. Our newspapers are based in countries. Our countries have our own interest and bias. The technology is international. It's everywhere. It's across the world. And Forbidden Stories and Amnesty were very wise to understand that it's impossible to report about anything from, I'll start with Pegasus, yeah? If you take just one country, right? An Israeli reporter could not do about NSO, and a French reporter alone could not, and an African reporter alone could not. You need everyone together because the scope and the span is global. And after doing Pegasus and this kind of idea of spyware, we kind of got together through Forbidden Stories and wanted to do disinformation as a field, and we didn't fully understand how to do it because, on the one hand you have OSINT kind of avatars, how do you scrape social media, but it's such a different world than what Carole had exposed, right? Getting a whistleblower. And Gur Megiddo, my colleague from the Marker, just had a great idea. He said, let's pretend to be a fake news like a client and then just try to get people to pitch to us. And like half the room just went, that's insane. And the other half said, wow, that's a really good idea. And he came up with the idea of saying we represent a businessman with ties to a government in an African country we wouldn't state, and there's an election scheduled for September, and we need that not to happen. That was the brief. And as we say, the fake news industry said, hold my beer. And for 6 months, we got pitches for stuff that we didn't know that even existed. And I just want to connect it to a sense to what Carole and Jonathan also had exposed about Cambridge Analytica. Like, if in retrospect, Cambridge Analytica is so naive. You know what I mean? They were doing hyper-targeting. And it was just this moment that we realized, as Carole said, that tech is not just a democratizing force. Who knew? It's not just this Arab Spring kind of stuff. It's also Trump, right? And then the Cambridge Analytica stuff comes out, and we realize that they're misusing technology, but we had no idea. And after 6 months of undercover kind of talks with this team, Jorge outfit, whatever, disinformation for hire group, we realized that there's actually disinformation as a service, as something you can buy. And it doesn't matter if you're a private company looking to kind of take a shit on another company, or if you're a political campaign and you can just buy this as a service. And this service, as was explained to us, is completely modular. Like you can have a fake account that, you know, sends, this is an exact example that Jorge gave us. Jorge is the head of this team of disinformation, that they can send, you know, they get an example he kept giving us was we can send sex toys to a politician's wife with a note saying thank you from last night sent from one of their fake accounts, and therefore destroy their career. And what they kept saying, that's disinformation of one, but it's very effective, right? Or you can take a broad approach and you can have 2,500 fake accounts spread across, you know, muddying the discourse. It depends what you need. And this whole idea of there being fake accounts at scale that you can hire and deploy was something that we didn't even know existed, yeah? Let alone softwares. There's what I call DaaS, disinformation as a software, and this idea that there are disinformation platforms that provide that can help create new kind of fake online personas. And I think my humble contribution, or our team Jorge's humble contribution to the kind of legacy that Carole helped kind of set up, is that this field is maturing and that our discourse kind of lags behind it, and we need to be able to mix methodologies and, to be honest, think outside the box. Like, you can't just wait for whistleblowers, you can't just do OSINT, you can't just do social media. If that was the case, we'd still be using terms like bots. I don't say bots. Bots is not a thing. You say avatars. Avatars are fake online personas that try to be me and you. So fake human agency is a thing, right? Yeah, that was mine.
And Jonathan, could you say a little more about how you see the way that journalists should approach telling these stories and getting this information out there?
Sure. So I think this might be somewhat controversial, but I see a pattern where, just like Carole said, we've gone through years of misinformation, disinformation research at least in the U.S. I mean, with very little effect, right? There's been no real change. I mean, there was temporary change. And there's always realignment with new administrations as they come in, but this is different. You know, there has been no kind of effect or effective change that has resulted in platforms being responsible for the content. And I mean, this involves multiple laws, but so I think that when we look in the future, so past 2025, we need to really think about journalists need to report tech, or they need to report on tech as something like it's usually a product. They're reporting on tech as a product. They're reporting on services. They're reporting on, you know, evil celebrity tech billionaires. But what we really need to do is, I think that storytelling-wise, we need to move to a different frame where tech is treated as critical infrastructure, right? So we need to report on tech just like we were to report, or we need to treat it like public critical infrastructure, like water or power. It's really that important. So it requires a reframing. It requires a different approach, and it requires setting up in the story some type of effective change or some type of regulatory angle that is built into the story. So if you're reporting on tech or you're reporting on these mishaps by platforms, I think that these things need to come together into a larger, more systemic, sustained effort in terms of technology, and we need to get away from the kind of tech as a product or covering tech like you would like entertainment. And we need to move towards, like I said, we need to report on it like power. We need to treat some politicians and tech people as natural, like we would treat natural disasters, or like we would treat a hurricane. So that's my short take.
And this very much fits in, Carole, with or leads me to think of your line, which is now that politics has essentially become tech, and that we need to think this isn't a thing for tech journalists anymore. This is an issue. Tech's the air we breathe. This is just an issue for all of journalism.
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty extraordinary being at this conference, I have to say, because on the one hand, there was this really punchy thing in that they opened it with my talking directly to Silicon Valley and saying, you're complicit, you're collaborators in this regime. And, it was deliberately to make people uncomfortable. And I have to say, for myself, that was also reflecting back at me. It was it was really, really weird being in the room with people, you know, who think really differently about this. And for them, this is a just great opportunity. But I think, you know, I was sort of saying that if there's one thing that I wanted people to take away, which is we can't have these conversations in silos anymore. It can't be that you're talking about tech over here and politics over here, because they are so, it is absolutely one and the same. But I have to say is that for much of it, the rest of the conference, that's been really absent. It still is the case that sort of like all of the issues around technology are happening in this bubble by technologists. And that for me is the sort of so much the critical thing that we have to reframe. And we have to reframe our understanding and perception of who these companies are and our relationship with them. You know, we have to really think about that they are now aligned with an autocrat. And what does that mean? An out of control, I mean, the US is now a rogue state. And so all the way, you know, Google and Facebook and OpenAI, they are now absolutely embedded in that regime. I can't think of any other way to talk about it. So, you know, the days of sort of, I don't know, researchers being in relationships with these companies, that needs to be rethought, I think. But I think the problem is so massive, and our sort of world view has been blown up so much in the last, you know, weeks. So as I just keep coming back to this thing of how do we communicate this to the public? How do we do a better job of saying what the stakes are? How do we show people of how dangerous having our data in the hands of these companies are? And so, yeah, to move back to the conversation, you know, I love what Omer's team did in that it was a really punky way of not just getting the information, but also storytelling that, like, this sort of really shady industry and how that operates. You know, so I think that was a sort of great way of doing it differently. But I mean, the way that I'm thinking about it at the moment is that it just hasn't broken through to people the scale of what Doge is doing with data, and so what's that going to take? And I think for me, it's going to take is something truly awful happening, something which people can't ignore, that is going to break through. And that's sort of terrifying in its own way. I mean, one of the things I would say is that I do feel that, you know, there has been a moment in the States when women have woken up to actually the impacts of using these apps, you know, period tracking apps, that being potentially accessed by state officials trying to police their access to healthcare. That's broken through in a way. So I think we just have to really keep zoning in on stories which matter and affect people, and you know, we've got to contain our own tendencies to want to get really nerdy and to you know communicate to our peers who are experts in the field, and really just keep trying to draw it back to a sort of more human-led way of reporting these issues, I suppose.
It's interesting that talking about, like you just were, and we did a minute ago, about what happens after the journalism. You know, we can have really, really, really great journalism that educates everyone. And I do think the kind of, compared to 2018 when Carole first reported on the Cambridge Analytica scandal, there is a sense, I think, that the public is much, much better educated about big data and tech now. But what comes afterwards, and I mean, we're very lucky. I mean, we're sitting in the EU at the moment, and there is still good regulatory processes in the EU and in the UK slightly. So I'm just interested in panelists. Do you think that we are in the best position here because there is still some regulatory response to some of the things that are uncovered? Maybe you could talk about
I can say just very briefly, I think the answer is a strong no. I think anyone who follows now AI discourse and knows the term alignment, for me, there's no bigger proof of the intellectual poverty that is driving our discourse than the word alignment. Alignment means that you teach the AI that it has to decide between killing me and non-killing me. It will generally veer towards not killing me. So this is what our discourse about regulation has shifted to the point where we're just hoping for the best. But I think at a bigger level, we don't have a discourse for this. So I think about disinformation. I give these talks all the time, and there's always someone raises their hand and says, so you believe that there needs to be a truth police? Like, someone needs to make sure you can't lie on social media. And I've struggled for a long time to think of a discourse that can answer that. And I think the answer is we need epistemic rights. We need to think of our ability as citizens to have free speech and free thought in a world that is polluted by fake voices. And I think the data feeds that fake voices, but it's important for us to be able to say in a clear voice, we have epistemic rights. We have a right to live in a world in which there's not 200 fake accounts screaming racist stuff at us, so we can make educated decisions. And we still lack this discourse. And the fact of the matter is that, as Jonathan pointed out, the biggest risk for most of this research is not legal stuff, it's to mess with Facebook. If you mess with Facebook's terms of use, they will sue you. That's insane, that what scares us is breaking their terms of use. After we published Jorge, their reaction to us was, you know, everything we did was legal. So that's not true. But they said generally it's legal. The only thing we did maybe wrong was, you know, Facebook doesn't allow you to open fake accounts. And they're kind of right. Like, our only framework for having this discussion is Facebook's terms of use. That says something terrible about us as citizens. We've lacked the political discourse to explain why this is bad.
Thank you. We've got sorry, Karen.
Oh, no, I just wanted to leap in on that, okay, which is that also because the conversation, you know, the Silicon Valley conversation now is just AI, 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 AI. I mean, I think we probably, I mean, until you're here and realize that, like I say, this sort of absolute gold rush which is happening, and that is all on stolen data. It's fundamental. And so it's like, yeah, we have regulation, we have laws. That's actually illegal. But by the time, you know, anybody tries to assert those rights, it's too late. The models have been made, the damages, and that, you know, to go back to what's happening in the government right now, that methodology, the Silicon Valley methodology of going in, breaking the law, getting away with it, total impunity, has now been imported into the heart of the, you know, most powerful government on the planet. So regulation is not going to save us. Laws are not going to save us. The only thing I believe now which can save us is massive, massive public education and perception change to, like, the scale of the risks. And what we've seen happen in terms of the feeling against Elon and Tesla, like, that is just the tip of the iceberg. We have to really get beyond that. And like I say, you know, we have to treat these platforms as the enemy. They are now. That's what they are.
Thank you. Just before we move on to questions, I just wanted to ask Jonathan one question about what's very important is behind this work, there are often very important funders, and we need funders who are going to kind of come to support organizations that do not have a lot of money and that are doing such important work.
Sure. So one of the complications, like from a funding perspective, from a research perspective, is really this is something that's emerging, is that the kind of when we do research now when we do research on platforms and even, like, I'll use the word AI, unfortunately, but you know, the complications of that research is it's so much more time intensive. So when we try to capture evidence from something like ChatGPT, the personalization is so far beyond what we would see in Google or what we would see in Google search results that it's nearly impossible unless we have coordinated or like massively replicated work going on, efforts to even capture data. And on top of that, of course, as it's been said, we don't even know the possibility of the information that's going to come from, for the answers, because we don't understand exactly what's in the models. So this goes beyond the algorithms actually to the information itself that's being provisioned. So one of the things that I think from a funding perspective is that we need different timelines when things are funded. So we need periods for a lot of the work that I've done. A lot of the best outputs has been through experimentation. It's been through like trying different methods, trying things that don't work, going back and circular methods. So trying different types of inquiries, some of which work, some of which don't. But that's not usually built into funding, right? So funding is usually very, very output focused. It's very rigid. There's deliverables and there's a timeline. So I think that building in different things to account for the situation today is quite important. And this might even include something like a period for research translation, where you have time that's dedicated in the project to translate or to properly translate your research into something that's a story, or by working with the journalist. So these things are not usually included in normal funding projects. So they're like the rigidity is quite is hard. So I think that there needs to be evolution in how this works. I'll throw in one more thing. I don't know if I'm going to have time to say it, but in terms of critical public infrastructure, we also, as researchers and journalists, there's no place to actually really store or share our data for transparency purposes, right? So if I have data from a data set and it's captured, so I've kind of captured that data, whether through scraping or the API, I've captured a point in time on a platform. You could even say ChatGPT. There's no non-big tech space to share that. It's GitHub, it's Kaggle. So Google owns Kaggle. That's fine. But I think that just like the Internet Archive is playing a more important role, increasingly important, for capturing things, because it's just like book burning. When websites are taken down, they potentially go away forever. We have link rot on top of that. So I think that there should be an effort made by funders or some type of project or collaborative effort to create kind of version of an archive, or accountability archive, I might call it, specifically for hosting data that's open and away from the big platforms. So if you want to host things, or if you want to share things on Tableau or Google or GitHub, that's fine. But on these big stories, journalists sharing their work out of Google Drive that's against big tech is kind of self-defeating, or using ChatGPT to do research on against Microsoft. So I think that we need new infrastructures, and we need new ways of looking at things, and one of these things includes data transparency, because I don't want to put things on GitHub or share things to a big tech hosted platform when I'm doing very critical research or sensitive research on, say, big tech.
Thank you. And just a quick shout out to IMED, which is the incubator for media education and development, who I know have supported a lot of your work, and just wanted to mention them. So we have a few minutes for questions, if anyone would like to ask anything. Yes, we have someone here, thank you, on the right.
Hi, thank you so much for the terrifying and brilliant discussion. So I work for a university. I do comms for our researchers. And international media outreach, and I would love to know how this pairing happened. How did you get researchers working with journalists? Because we have research coming out on Apple and privacy and the geopolitics of where data is stored and all this kind of stuff, and we fight so hard. We're a university in Finland. We fight hard to try and push it out there in the world, but how can we get these kind of collaborations between researchers and journalists happening?
That's a very good question. Carole, would you like to answer that one?
I mean, I love that as a question, because it's so, as a journalist, and the reason, I'm working on a project with Miazia and Jonathan at the moment, because I was sort of tearing my hair out of how do you understand what is actually happening online? That is such a difficult thing to approach these days. There's so many different platforms. It's such a vast job to even think how to research it. So, I've been really fortunate that Jonathan and Miazia we've been able to come together, and because the bit that, I really like doing is the storytelling, is the trying to make it accessible, but having that fundamental research which underpins it is so important. So I think to your question, which is that I think trying to identify, because what you have in is amazing resource. If you've got researchers doing interesting things, Like journalists genuinely would, I think would love to know more about that. But I think it's about sort of finding journalists who seem to be doing the same kind of work that you're in that field, and reaching out and trying to build relationships with them, but doing it well ahead of publication, because by publication, it's sort of, I think by the time it's in a press release, it's less interesting, it's less exciting. I think bringing in a journalist much earlier to like really understand what's going on and to really think about like, well, actually, how could this work journalistically? How could it work from a storytelling perspective? Would be really valuable. So it's a great question to be asked, I think, and I hope that that more of these collaborations could come out of this.
Yeah, that point about time is a really interesting one, because if I'm right, one of the pieces of research that was kind of embedded at the beginning of Carole's Cambridge Analytica research was something that Jonathan had done on right-wing networks building on the internet. And there was a lot of time between that Carole reporting on that and Cambridge Analytica, but the two were very, very, very linked. Do we have any other questions? Someone at the back there, thank you.
And I'll just say in the meantime, the opposite also. So give researchers journalists, not just the other way around.
Yeah, and also talk to journalists about like what, I think in terms of like what's being researched, because there is obviously a value to fundamental research, but if it's not something that people care about and can understand, then it's, it has much narrower, kind of value really. So I think, having those conversations at the start even would be really valuable.
Our question.
Hi, John Oliveira here from the Netherlands. Carole, thank you for the dystopian view. I think you're 100% right, and the wake-up needs to be done. So, but my question is more: you define social, the big tech companies as the enemy, but the majority of the people living on this planet are on these platforms. So, and including all the journalists. So, what will be the next step, or what is the solution? Because my worry is that it's fighting against, well, evil, but I don't hear alternatives. So what are your thoughts about that? Thank you.
Great question. Omer, would you like to answer that?
That's a really tough question, really. I think we have to stop thinking in these dichotomies. I think on the one hand, you're right, and I'm also on Twitter, and I promote my stuff on Twitter. But I think technology, there's something like we're somehow been gaslit by this discourse of innovation, and we're somehow constantly, riding the thing. And I think Carole's work in general, you can disrupt it. You can say, no, that's bullshit. That's not true. We don't have to actually, participate or collaborate in that same way. And I think, I'm sure what Jonathan was kind of alluding to this, but for example, and Carole said it, like collaborating with these tech firms. So that's something that was in fashion for many years, and I think it should not be in fashion anymore. These people are not actually interested in collaborating with us. They're looking to cover their asses. That's not the same thing. And it's okay to say we won't serve as fig leaves for these, quasi-independent research organizations they set up, for example. So that would be my answer to you. And again, I'll just return to the political spiel. Epistemic rights. We have rights, and we have to talk about it in this way and not let the tech world dictate our discourse.
Thank you. I think that's a very good note to finish on. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to our brilliant panelists. Very interesting talk. Thank you.